Hi, I'm Andy. I'm a research software engineer with the RCI team, research cyber infrastructure. And I was the dev for Gateway V2. So it's mostly similar to V1 with, I guess, the addition of a couple of new features, workflows, etc. So landing page, cmiki.its.hawaii.edu. Your sign-in is simply your UH like email sign in, everything sign in with UH. There shouldn't be a dual mobile, whatever. So I'll be walking through the gateway, very general main components where you can look for things, etc. I'll also be touching upon the new metadata aspect of the gateway, the metadata requirements, the tools we have, etc. As well as some very basic troubleshooting that anyone can do right off the rip in case they run a workflow, encounter some issues before you reach out, or even when you do reach out, what to look for, what to share, etc. So that being said, the gateway's main components can all be found here in this little side toolbar. You have your apps, which are your pipelines, your workflows, etc. You have your files, which is your file navigation, jobs, which are the applications that you have submitted a job with, metadata tool, a walkthrough PowerPoint. It is based on the original walkthrough, if anyone's clicked through that before, updated for, of course, V2, as well as our help email. So this is, if you do have any questions, run into any issues, that help link should open your email app perspective and send an email to the proper place. Anyways, we'll start here with apps, or I guess the dashboard. The dashboard shows you your main components again, jobs, apps, data systems, aka files, as well as your activity feed. So these are just all your recent jobs, top 5 jobs, etc. In your applications, my apps will be a longer list because I have a bunch of garbage in here. But the main apps that everyone will be have access to are the original demultiplexer, ITS 16S version 0.0.2, excuse me, and a variety of Ampliseq pipelines. So Ampliseq is this NF Core community created bioinformatics pipeline, super powerful, tons and tons of options. We've streamlined them into a couple of different variants based on, I guess, user feedback. So one that is catered more to ITS and one that is catered to 16S. And the only difference here between these two and the full pipeline are just the options presented to you. In the full pipeline, the parameters are something like 112, 120 something odd parameters. 16S narrows those down to those similar to what you find currently in 16S 0.0.2. But anyways, let's take a look. So from your apps, you can run any app. You can find some help information. I'm not sure what that says. Help information, etc. Enter the app, and this will take you to the app's job launcher. So this is how you will interact with said app, tune your parameters, submit your jobs for your analyses. To start with, the name for this job is something you can now customize. So if you were to name this job something like job 6, your files will be saved into a directory called job 6. So it's for easier identifications of whatever your job outputs are, etc. I want to bring your attention to this execution option. So this is a field that we used to kind of hide a little bit more. It's always been available in V1, but I still get questions, well, when V1 is up. I did get questions about execution options. This kind of opens your hardware options for running these very compute-intense pipelines. So currently, the gateway has access to 2 different queues. One is C-MΑIKI's own group's own allocation. That is a compute with something like a single node. I think there are 48 cores in that node and some odd amount of memory. I want to say it's in the ballpark of either 64, bless you, or 100 something.
I think it's like 150.
Something like that. Yeah. These are all tweakable if, say, you have a much larger data set to be running with. But I do want everyone keep in mind that this is a shared resource, C-MAIKI, as well as the other optional queue, COA shared. So if you request larger resources, like you just want to throw the whole memory and all 48 cores or nodes, excuse me, at it, that will plug up everyone else, as well as the queue is based on, I guess, resource management in the sense if you have a smaller request, so if you can fine tune your hardware requirements to what you just need, you will be slotted into the queue quicker than if you were to try to grab a lot more. Maximum minutes. This is set to some default based on a pretty decent sized data set. So this is for 4 hours. Some people do need to run longer. So these are all tweakable parameters. As I mentioned, there is a second queue, Koa Shared. Koa Shared is just the general HPC. Anyone with a Koa account can run on Koa Shared. And if you are running jobs from, let's say, the command line via Koa, this is what you'll gain access to. It is far more limited in hardware. Koa Shared is this one right here. There's a 3-day wall time limit, certain amounts of CPU cores and whatnot that you can request. So these are all different things to keep in mind. But say C-MΑIKI is plugged up, your job's not going anywhere. Another option is to throw it onto Koa Shared as long as it obeys these parameters, and then hopefully get your job in quicker. Okay, from there, it's really more or less the same as.
If I could just pause you, does anybody have any basic questions about general architecture and that kind of thing?
Yes.
Not general architecture, but I have a question about what happens if the job runs beyond the maximum minutes? Does it kill the job?
Yes. So their job will fail. So
Five any. You just have to start it from the beginning. I mean, it's a.
unfortunately, yes, you have to start it from the beginning again. Yes. Yes. So there's no, I guess, resume on these pipelines currently.
Yeah, so I'm not an expert, and then how do I, know how much memory I should put in there?
I think this is a safe default. 32. I've run most of the pipeline tests on much smaller amounts of compute resources, 8 cores, etc. So when I was testing on some decent sized data sets, I would use a single core, 8 gigs memory. And of course, this is not reflective of everyone's data sets, the size, etc. But this is a pretty decent place to start, I suppose. And yes, unfortunately, if say you're timing out or it's insufficient, it will be a matter of resubmitting the said job. Craig, do you have any?
Yeah, I could just add a couple things. So if you're familiar with your laptop, this laptop right here has 10 cores. It has about 16 gigabytes of RAM. So there it's asking for basically 2 laptops. So that's not much. That's typically enough to run a typical sequence, like a small sequencing run. If you use like a Illumina MySeq, this is plenty of resources. The 4-hour thing typically is plenty. It's usually more like 2 hours or something like that. Feel free to adjust those. The more resources you ask for, the less likely it is for your job will run. C-MAIKI node is not, it's under like sporadic use. So sometimes it's got a lot of users, sometimes it has no users. So you could ask for the entire node all at once, and your job would probably run right now because a lot of people are in this room and they're not running jobs. But this is a pretty good ballpark. I mean, if your question about like, can you recover the job? If you're more fluent in using the server, this tool is not for you. So if you want to like have jobs that get killed and then you recover them, that means you're more fluent and you know how to interface with the actual server itself. This tool is for people who do not understand how to interact with servers. That's why we designed it. And so that's why if you run out of time, your job's dead, run it again with more time. That's kind of the approach. It's very like empirical rather than carefully designed.
Any other questions?
Really about. So you might, from the command, like not through the service. Yeah.
I know, yeah. That's the me. That's the goal. That's correct.
don't know if he gets access to remote or not. So today, so the C-MAIKI bylaw.
Well, there's no way to gatekeep the code per se if you're sponsored, I think is.
I think basically if you are on the server, if you're on COA, you get an account with COA from cyber infrastructure, then you connect to C-MAIKI because you're a C-MAIKI member. You can use the C-MAIKI node. The C-MAIKI node is pretty small. It's not like some great node. It's just designed to house this thing. But yeah, I think everybody can use the C-MAIKI as long as you're part of the C-MAIKI bylaws.
So the 16S and ITS might be a question for you, Craig. Like, are these only the primers that people usually use for the microbiome stuff? Or like, can I like upload my own primer sets and then with a different target region?
The short answer is yes, but you need to be a little bit more fluent in using the server. So the gateway is designed for people who are not fluent in command line.
Yeah,
And so we have set protocols for ITS and 16S because those are the most commonly used ones.
okay, so those are
We
the,
also have protocols for like CO1, and we have a couple other pipelines for like we have an 18S specific pipeline. Most of this, I mean, the ITS one, I think, is only been used by a couple of people. So the main workhorse here is 16S. I'm happy to show you how to do command line if you want to do totally different primers with amplicons. And I'll talk more about that with the Ampliseq pipeline because it's very flexible and has lots of different pipelines.
gotcha. Thank you.
Yes.
If we wanted to add an app, how do we do that?
So unfortunately, I guess adding an app would be a request to add an app, and then I would then work through how to add that app and then add that app, I suppose, would be the current workflow for that. The gateway is not open to users themselves adding their own applications to the gateway.
And we just email?
Yeah, this help email. And then I suppose I would run it by the powers that be. Hey, should this pipeline be on the gateway? So on and so
Yeah,
forth.
basically to devote Andy's time to developing another app, it's a fair amount of work to set this gateway up for an app. So we would want a lot of users.
Yeah, what if we do like the whole workflow, like give them the whole workflow, is it to reduce the burden on his time?
Still a lot of work.
So I guess we've never really discussed adding pipelines from user feedback. That is, of course, always an option, depending on how we want to allocate said time. And it would definitely involve a back and forth between a domain expert and myself to translate whatever said workflow requirements are there and then put it into the platform we have that serves the gateway, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, remember this tool is for people who cannot code
Yeah.
in command line interface. So it's really only for things that have high use and low user expertise. So that's really why it's only right now only tailored to 16S and ITS. But certainly adding apps, that's what it's for, right? It's supposed to be a thing. Like if a lot of people want to start doing eDNA and they all want CO1 pipelines, that's why we've been developing. Because it's like, oh, everybody's gonna need. So.
Yes.
So there's like core shared and then core shared long. We're allowed to use either of those, right?
The only core shared.
Just okay.
Yeah.
We can't use the long one.
No, well, it's not an option presented regardless. But if say you wanted to use co-shared long from the command line, you could. Sandbox, GPU, all those outside of the gateway. You can definitely access those. Other questions? Cool. So I'm just going to breeze through the rest. This is essentially the same job inputs form. You find your, let's see here. You find your files, your test sequences, or excuse me, your data sets, what have you, sequence files, add them to the reads. Right now, there is a metadata file requirement, which I will be speaking upon later. So you will need to upload a corresponding metadata file. Let's see here. And you can tweak your different parameters. So these defaults have been set by, I guess, conversations back and forth with what is reasonable for most use cases. But of course, if you are fluent with said pipelines, et cetera, all tweakable. Unfortunately, I myself cannot provide much guidance on that, but we do have, again, help documentation. Each of these pipelines, the original one, 16S, ITS, DMUX, et cetera, have their own documentation. Ampliseq, if you are delving into that territory, is a very well-documented pipeline used through the community. Yeah, I think that's, for the most part, job submission. Yes.
So it said OTU, so you're not doing ASV calling, you're doing an OTU approach of clustering. It looked like 100%, so it's like identical leads.
ASV is an operational taxonomic.
That is correct.
So if you put 100 there, you'll get ASVs.
But is there an error correction, like the
Yes.
denoising mark?
Yes.
Cool. From there, once you submit a job, it'll join the queue. It'll present here in your jobs list. It'll give you pending statuses. So whether it's setting up, staging, running, finished, etc. As you can see here, I only have completed jobs. Failed will show, okay, something went wrong. Time to investigate. Finished is, of course, your pipelines reach the end. And canceled is if, say, you see, obviously, this is not going anywhere. You need to tweak something. You can kill it, leave, take it out of the queue, and then start over again, something along those lines. So all of these different jobs you can view either from the jobs details page here, or you can go through your file directory, navigating through different directories, I guess. So if we take a look at, say, this one, job details, this is, I guess, the standard output for something like 16S, tarballs, etc. These are all downloadable through this toolbar. You select it, gives you some information on them, I guess, metadata-wise, and then moving them around File Navigator. Let's see here. Any questions, I guess? Those are the bulk of the gateway, essentially. Metadata. So metadata is a new aspect to the entire gateway in a push for more fair, compliant sort of data, I suppose. We have a recommended workflow. This guide page, or this guide tab rather, is where you would land when you enter this metadata tool. I highly recommend everyone to at least poke through. Yes, there is a lot. The more detailed areas are collapsed in these bottom sections here, but at least the very general gist of the guide at the very beginning. So the recommended workflow, what we're looking for, etc. So what we recommend is you go to this link here. That'll take you to a Google spreadsheet, because Google Sheets is a pretty nice interface with a lot of nifty tools in it already built in. This will have all the required fields, I guess, in yellow, and these various other options, project-specific, I guess, fields and whatnot. If you want access to your, excuse me, if you want access to the terms, there was a tab there, but it's blocked by my toolbar. But anyways, these metadata terms definitions are in that metadata terms tab of the spreadsheet. Google Sheets can do things like dropdowns. So we have included dropdowns here. We can even do conditional dropdowns. So depending on what you chose in your prior field, if it's contingent upon that, it will render whatever options are there, but it will not validate. It will not ensure your fields are correct. Some of them I've tried to include some very basics, like if you have collection date and you add, I don't know, letters, something like that. That's a no-go. Some very basic inline validation. But for submission of the metadata tool, excuse me, for submission of the metadata form, once you have it completed, you would download your copy of that and take it here to the metadata tool itself to then upload here. So you'd upload the XLSX, so that's important. That's the file type that we currently support. And then it would then populate this form with all your filled out fields, and it'll do the validation. Yes, question? No? Oh, sorry, I thought I saw an hand. Yeah, that's what that looks like. Let's see if I have, I think this is a small one. So yeah, it will give you errors for what it doesn't support, what it's not pulling, show you briefly what you are pulling, etc., to preview that and fill said fields. There are some nifty little keyboard shortcuts that I think most users familiar with spreadsheet types of tools would expect. So those are all mentioned in the guide as far as what you can do, like drag and fill, etc. But the key here, I guess, is that this will validate your metadata, telling you whether it's compliant with what we're looking for or not, at least at this level. So these error messages are meant to be hopefully informative and telling you exactly what you're looking, where you've gone wrong, collection data in this example and sample 4, etc. When it's all green, you can then have an option to upload said metadata file to your directory in the C-MΑIKI allocation. From there, you can pull it down into pull it down into your job, upload it there, corresponding metadata file for whatever samples you're uploading. That's the majority of the metadata tool, I suppose. Here in the guide again, it is demonstrating what we are looking for, what would match, what would not. It's very, very, how do you say, elementary validation right now. We do not have any complex, like if you have some sort of correct latitude, longitude, or sample types, etc. But we do want to make sure that you have some sort of metadata corresponding to your sample sequences. So it's a name matching situation right now. Again, all in the guide. I think that wraps up most of it for metadata, the different aspects. Any questions? Yes.
So we have to have it now to run a pipeline.
Yes.
And but then also, this is metadata that you're collecting. It's not like necessarily experimental metadata that you might use to further, make some assumptions of file seek something. What do you mean? So the metadata, it's more for someone else to get a context on what your data is if they were going to use it. But for example, if I was going to go take this into Ampliseq and I had an experiment and this was treated and this was control, like, is that the kind of metadata that you're trying to collect? That like treatments are not one of the fields. So that's one use of it, is for data sharing. Another one is that it makes your work fair compliant, which is a requisite of most federal funding agencies and also a requisite of most peer reviewed journals now too. So that's my personal there.
It's for data submission, right? So this would be used, can you use the gateway then to submit to SRA and then you would use this metadata file for that?
So I don't think it's formatted as the SRA, it's formatted.
It will make your life a lot easier when submitting to SRA. I think to answer your question, Alexa, is generally speaking, this is designed so that other people can use the data. In your experiments, your two treatments, that's those sort of experimental treatments, that kind of nuance is low priority for other people using the data. The higher priority is knowing basic things like where it was collected, when it was collected, what kind of sample it is, that sort of stuff. The word metadata obviously is very loose here, right? This is information about the samples that have been sequenced so that this data can then be used by others who are doing work within our GUI, potentially in the future outside.
Yeah, it's interesting. It just makes me, to evolve. I mean, I know that you guys are still building this and everything. It just makes me wonder, like, if I was gonna try and go grab someone's data,
is there a comprehensive information provided? Like, was this information actually part of an experiment? It was like treated with a pesticide, but that didn't make it into the metadata, and so I wouldn't even know that as someone that was like, oh, hey, cool.
Correct, you would not know that.
Amplify sequencing,
That's not really the solar. So if you have those types of questions, if you become like a shared user, then it would be on you to talk to the person who generated that. So I just want to say that like with this, it may feel uncomfortable, but we're actually like slightly, and part of that, the reason for that is that we're slightly ahead of the curve. I met with the director of what used to be DEV in the NSF at the meeting I was at. And she said that this type of thing is going to be required moving forward for all NSF proposals in your data management plan. So whether you're doing it with us or you're doing it with the SRA, we're trying to make it as painless as possible so that you have a reference for when you're moving forward with like grant submissions. And then when it comes to fair practices for publishing, you know, a lot of journals are no longer satisfied with just saying that your sequences have been submitted to something like that. Sorry, they want much more detailed associated metadata to be fair compliant. So, yeah.
since it's not publicly accessible, will it be accepted by?
Well, so you can use the sheet that you generate as
Somewhere else.
yeah. And depending on the journal, there's even some journals that ask for that type of sheet, which is a lot.
Can you add columns to your metadata sheets that upload to the C-MAIKI gateway? And will it accept that, or will that throw up errors?
To be honest, it's been a minute.
This might just be the minimum.
So-
Data, but then you could have your own treatment columns. Or
Yeah.
pesticide columns.
So if you were to make your own copy of metadata, this one, the form we recommend everyone start with, yes, you can add your own columns and you can upload that exact spreadsheet up. The tool would not ingest those columns that you've appended because we're not looking for those, but we also won't reject your metadata file if you have a whole bunch of extra ones. So it's, I guess, open-ended in that regard.
So like for your own records.
Other questions? Okay, I'll just go over some very basic troubleshooting, things you might encounter if you are playing around with Gateway, testing Gateway, etc. Once you run a job. So as I've described earlier, you'll have various statuses once your job is either completed, failed, etc. And the first place you would start, say you see this one here that says failed, is to go to the job details and then pull up, hopefully, your Tapish job output file. So tapish job.out is it will print, how do you say, all pipeline text outputs, and it's for debugging, troubleshooting, etc. So the pipelines can fail in a few different ways. Pipeline itself can fail if some parameters were wrong or went over time, etc. We can have system failure, so something on our end with ITS, say we're doing node maintenance, we killed some jobs, etc. There's also, I guess, the metadata failure. So if your metadata is not compliant, your metadata is not matching, etc. These errors will show up. For metadata failure specifically, there will be a metadata validation errors text file that is hopefully, it's not very informative, it's just telling you what went wrong. So very generally, you have 1,246 files, but only 36 of them have a corresponding metadata entry in your metadata file that we are looking for, if that makes sense. So anytime you have a job that's come out, whether it's completed successfully or failed, the first place to look would be here at the tapish job.output for a general overview and summary. What that looks like when there is a failure is something along the lines of this. So your pipeline will begin to run. You can see here, this is an Ampliseq pipeline with your various parameters all just like dumped on the top. It will output whatever the pipelines themselves are written to output A lot of this will be gibberish. It's just the steps that they're taking, what progress, etc. But if there is a failure, you will start to see these little patches, little islands of text. Some of these may be easier to decipher than others, but at the very end, you will see, and oh, the screen's cut off. But you will see the exit code, pipeline failed, please refer to troubleshooting documents, etc. Some of these will be easier to decipher for users than others. Some are very basic, some are very pipeline specific. If you run into issues that you yourself cannot solve, this is probably something that when you reach out through that help email over here, hey, my pipeline, this and that, the other thing, I would probably be asking first thing for you to be sharing that Tapas output file. But as I mentioned, there are cases where jobs fail because of a system error. In that case, more than likely, there will be no Tapas job output file. So when that happens, I guess that's like the first queue. And what you would be looking at then would be here in the job details. There will be, I guess, job status runs with some informative system level happening steps, statuses, etc. So for this one that failed, I would be asking again for you to be sharing this file for me to be deciphering. Yeah, that's very basic troubleshooting. 2 places to look, I guess, or 3 metadata validation errors. Cool. Any other questions before I hand it over to Craig to discuss more pipeline things? Yes.
I mean, I have a number of questions, but I'm not going to start general pragmatic questions.
We'll dismiss them if they're not worth the time.
To pipeline specific things, it will be like Craig's section, I suppose, and then I guess for the technical aspects of how to use the gateway, not the pipelines themselves, I guess that would be me.
And an easy one then. There was some naming thing. I can't remember, it's like you have to delete the L001 or something. Is that still happening on the suffix? Like it couldn't get, okay, probably still. I don't know if anyone else was running into that, but data that would come from ASGPP had to be trimmed off of they put their lane on the end of all their names and then remove it. I'm just curious.
If that's the case, I would love for you to share that situation with me so I can take a look. We're constantly tweaking this to make sure it's not too prohibitive. And I don't want you trimming it every single time. That'd be ridiculous. So if we can accommodate it into what we're looking for, it's a very simple conditional pattern that I've got plugged in there just for validation. So yeah.
This is a generic problem across all pipelines, and this is exactly what it's basically, we can make small tweaks when these things are cropping up. If you read any pipeline, like if you read the source code, if you read the help files, there's a lot of like that kind of stuff, file and then an issue, that's a common sequencer facility issues, that's what they.
Yeah, so we'd love any, I guess, like edge cases, those sorts of things, so we're catching more.
Right, I'll bother you whenever.
Please do, yeah. Other questions? Gateway, technical, anything like that? Okay, I'll hand it over to.
One one's for Andy. I mean, I have a few other ones, but my main question is actually regarding citation, so that's like an important one. So I think most people in here like know me as the MGAL, molecular person building libraries. So if I understand your classic 16S and 19S pipeline were specifically built for the EMP protocol, which uses Golay barcodes. And I know that you have demultiplex on there, but most people probably that are using this are just getting the demultiplex data, plugging it in. I think so. I know that sequencing primers are different. You have different sequencing primers for EMP libraries and Nextera libraries. And a lot of times we build Nextera libraries, but with the same primer. The target is the same, but the way the library is built is different. And so I think, and when I got to finally getting into the question, I think your 16S pipeline is strictly built for EMP libraries because those trimming parameters, I think, are going to be specific for the EMP sequencing primers that actually don't sequence the amplification primers themselves. Is that true? So if I plugged a Nextera 515, 806, 16S library into your 16S pipeline, did I get not? I probably got primer sites back.
Suspect this is.
I'm so sorry, that's a correct question. I'm just a general dev, I made a website.
The short answer is,
Yeah,
the short answer is you're probably fine.
Okay.
So the way that the pipelines generally work, and I mean all pipelines, not just the one that we have implemented on the gateway, is they're usually, especially when they're dealing with Illumina, which again is a particular sequencing platform. And whether you use Nextera, meaning the Nextera branded sort of double PCR combo that Illumina sells, or you're using the primers that were designed by the Earth Microbiome Project at UCSD, because they sequence after the primer, basically, you have to have different things.
The Nextera primers anneal to the adapters, the sequencing primers.
It's probably beyond the scope of today's discussion.
I think my ultimate question is the pipeline unique to EMP?
I know this pipeline, all we're doing is implementing pipelines that other people have written. And most of the pipelines, they do not care what primer you're using. So they're generally reading after the primer. And I'm happy to show you a video and talk to you about it. But I've run these same pipelines on different sequencing facilities, different primers, different ways of building libraries, including both the EMP and Nextera, and they pretty much all work the same. And that's kind of how they're designed. So it should be fine. There's always going to be little tweaks that happen, but generally speaking, these pipelines work on any way of building amplicons, even with different primers, 16S, CO1, ITS. ITS in particular gets complicated, and even then the pipelines still more or less work. Okay, I'm gonna quickly plug in. This shouldn't take too long. The goal here is to introduce you to the actual pipelines that we have. If anybody has any questions about doing this, I'm happy to answer them.
I laugh, but if you guys have general questions, feel free to shoot me an email. We do have a data management plan that explains a lot about how we ended up with the fields that we ended up with in that data. And then also some tips about if you're going to be starting a new project, things to think about. We'll be sharing that with all current users, but we wanted to do our storage cleanup first to see who is still active. But that'll be going around, and then we'll also have a user agreement that we're working on for current and future users that you'll be seeing from Nicole and up to this distant. Thank you. See you next week. I asked another question there.
Yep.
Going. So, and just to make sure I understand, the new.
I'll get back in and go.
The new rules are, if you use the pipeline, you're not required to share your data. You are required to share your data if you want to use C-MàIKI storage.
Not super clear on this. Nicole can probably.
Initially, it won't be public. After 18 months, we're planning to do that switch. So if you don't want it public, we give you the option of pulling everything off. And if not, it'll become available to other users.
And the metadata is now mandatory to use the gateway. So you can't use the gateway without. And that is a hurdle. It's harder to use the gateway now. Okay, so on the website, accessible through the gateway. And remember, the intention of the gateway is to make these pipelines accessible to people who cannot code with a command line interface. Generally speaking, if you're doing bioinformatics, you should probably be using command line interface. But many students don't want to do that.
And we made this gateway that Andy just presented specifically for that use case. So all of the focus here is on making things streamlined and choosing options for you. The assumption is that you are doing sort of standard pipeline stuff. We have 5 apps that I think Andy showed you. We have an ITS and a 16S app that were written in, I don't know, 2018. And then we have these new apps. And the program that we've chosen here, instead of our bespoke pipelines, is this program Ampliseq. Both our old pipelines and our new pipelines are written in a programming, it's not really a language. I don't know, Andy, what do you guys call Nextflow?
Syntax.
A syntax called Nextflow. So, and Nextflow is a community of people who use this programming language, programming syntax, essentially to string different programs together. So all of our pipelines, the idea is that there are 20 programs out there that you need to connect to each other. Data to, Mother, Chime to, Cut Adapt, ITS Express. There's you have a whole bunch of programs that you looked up on GitHub. You want to make them all talk to each other. That's what Nextflow is for. If you go on their website of NF Core, people publish their pipelines. There's pipelines for everything: transcriptomics, mass spec data, metagenomics, anything you want. Ampliseq is one pipeline. It is written for amplicons. If you're working with amplicons, 16S, ITS, CO1, anything like that, it's a great little pipeline. It is super well specified on here. There are tabs for the introduction, the usage, the parameters. I'll go through each of those. One of the main things that I like in Ampliseq is that if you want to do something that isn't a normal amplicon, like 18S, and you want to use the PR2 database, for the most part, it's all built in here. So this is a nice ecosystem for amplicon work, basically. Any questions before I launch into talking about Ampliseq really quickly? Yeah.
Do the apps have to be written for Nextflow, or could they be written like in Bash or
The apps. What do you mean by the apps?
the apps on the gateway?
The gateway runs the apps are pipelines. We call them apps because it's cute, but they are pipelines. So, for example, the 16S Ampliseq pipeline is written in Nextflow, but on the gateway it is implemented without you having to know Nextflow. If you want to put an app on the gateway, Andy, does it have to be in Nextflow? No, it doesn't have to be in Nextflow. That's your question?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can run other kinds of apps on the gateway as like an interface. The gateway is an interface. Any other questions before I launch into talking about Ampliseq? Okay, so I'm going to go through this relatively quickly. Because for the most part, if you read this, you will understand how Ampliseq works. They have a nice written introduction. They have a graphic illustrating all the different parts of the pipeline, all the different options you have, the databases that it interfaces with, the way that it handles, for example, there are questions about denoising and stuff, how it uses Data2, how it uses Chime, how it types in all these various programs, and the way that it reports things out. Generally speaking, everything is hyperlinked. So you can understand here, they quickly summarize all of the core programs that they're using, and there are a few more. If you go up here to usage, it will walk you through all the different things that the pipeline does if you run it in the command line interface. And the most important thing here is all the different parameters. For each parameter, it explains how you enter the parameter in the command line interface. Sometimes it gives you help text explaining what an input folder is to you. So it's very helpful and very intuitive. And there are like 100,000 parameters you can enter into this pipeline. If you're working with ITS data, you want to have different databases. They explain them all here. What we have done on the gateway is taken a subset of these parameters that we think are important, how you run .2 to denoise your amplicons, which database you use to classify your amplicons. Is that Silva? Is that Green Genes if you're using 16S? Is it PR2 if you're using 18S? I can't remember the CO1 one. Unite is the fungal one. So we have taken like 150 parameters, distilled it down to about 20, and implemented those in the gateway. The ones that we think you should be able to tweak, we allow you to tweak in the gateway. The ones that we don't think you should be tweaking, we don't allow you to tweak. So the gateway is basically a slimmed down version. If there are particular things that you want to do differently on Ampliseq, you can run it in the command line interface, and it explains to you how it does. All the gateway does is it makes a command line and it runs it. So it's a fairly straightforward thing. One of the things that the pipeline does is it makes results, and they have here a nice little Amazon web, what's it called? Amazon, whatever AWS is, example folder of the results that you will see if you run our gateway pipeline. Your folder will have outputs from .2, outputs from FastQC, a folder for your inputs. If you want PyCrust, it will have that. If you want to go into Filoseq afterward, it'll have that. Here's all your Chime 2 outputs. You can go through this on their website, and a good example is like multi-QC. You can kind of see this is essentially results for an example pipeline, and you can look at that HTML file and kind of see, oh, when I run the pipeline, I'm going to get these samples, and it's going to tell me a little bit about how many duplicated reads they are, what the GC content is. So the nice thing about that output section of the website is it gives you an example of what your outputs would look like for a typical sequencing run, which I think is really helpful. And sure, and lo and behold, that's probably what I meant to say. If you run our pipeline, you will get a folder with those same folders and with those same HTML files. And there's some really nice little perks that are in there. I don't know the best way to get up here. In this results section, you can get this pipeline info thing, which actually writes your whole methods section for you. One of these. Sorry, I had this all open on my laptop. I don't know if this is going to quite work. It's not super intuitive, but there we go. So it tells you basically everything that you ran in the pipeline, gives you lots of little graphs of how each step of the pipeline ran. And I think pipeline. Okay, I'm not sure which one of these, but one of them essentially has a paragraph that you can paste into your paper that is the method section, and it tells you in English with all the references that you need, what database you used and the reference for that database and how you ran .2 and what your trimming parameters were so that you can essentially move that into a paper. So all of these things are things that like we wish we'd put in our pipeline when we wrote it, but I think Ampliseq, because it's an open source community and there's active devs who work on Ampliseq, I don't know how they get paid, seems to be like a really well-rounded pipeline. So from our perspective, this is where we're headed. We think that this is a good tool. Somebody else developed it. We don't have to maintain it. And so we're just implementing it on the game. So any questions about Ampliseq, how it works? So what I recommend you do is if you have a sequencing run that you know how it works, you make a metadata file for it, you upload your sequencing run and your metadata file, and you try this pipeline with data that you currently have analyzed before. You kind of know how it's going to work. You compare it with your old pipeline outputs. You look at the way the data is output, you kind of already know what it's going to look like. And looking at the outputs from this pipeline, you should immediately see, oh yeah, the pipeline worked really well with data that I kind of understand already. And that way you'll be ready if you get new data and have to deal with the metadata file and all that. What's really difficult for people is getting over the metadata file hurdle when they're anxious to run a pipeline. So that's the part that we really want you to preempt, is basically try something old, make it work first so that you're ready when you finally get new data. Any questions? Okay, now to be clear, our old pipelines are still up there and at work. They've been up there for 5, 6 years. We haven't changed anything about them, except that you now have to input a metadata file to run. Great.
Do you know of any components in this pipeline that compares parameters and you know, like for example, like where you cut your forward or reverse reads to be able to merge the most reads together? Like are there any components like comparing these instead of like the user having to run it at different parameters? And
Yeah, that's a great question. So to more broadly say what Maggie's asking, a lot of times you open up like a pipeline and we have default parameters, like specifically with like trimming, length trimming. So those default parameters both come from the community, sort of like generally what people use, and also from our experience, and they're pretty good defaults. But who knows, maybe your sequencing run was especially bad or especially good, and maybe you want to like adjust those parameters. How do you adjust them? And the short answer is the ideal way, what Maggie's kind of hoping is that you can run the pipeline 6 different ways, and it will basically tell you, you know, oh, look, you get the most reads out, or the most quality reads out, or the most things classified if you trim, you know, if your read is 300 base pairs and you trim it to 210 instead of 220. And the short answer is yes, run the pipeline 6 different ways and compare the outputs. But no, there's no automated, like, it looks like for your sequencing run, the best parameters are this. And that's frustrating because, frankly, even in our gateway, there's 20 parameters you have to tweak. And in a typical pipeline, there's 150 that you have to tweak. So yeah, I hear your pain. But usually the defaults are fine, depending on what you're doing. We should have a user community for some of the core things that people do. For 16S, I think that's pretty well established. I tend to field a lot of the 16S questions. I would love to not be fielding all those 16S questions. So I used to teach a class that built that user community, and I will do that again if we have a big user community. That user community has dwindled. I think ITS, for example, I just figured out that our ITS pipeline isn't working great, and that's because we don't have a good ITS user community. So I think that's one of the things that I'd really like to see C-MΑIKI do, is make it so that there's those user communities so people can basically give you advice. You can be like, hey, here's how my sequencing run looks. Here's my fast QC for one of my samples. What do you think I should do? It looks really bad right here. Should I trim it more? And basically people could say, nah, it looks fine or something like that. People who are fluent. Yeah.
And the follow-up question is that when you say that the pipeline usually works fine or works well, it, you know, gives you an acceptable output, but maybe not the optimized.
Yeah, and optimizing is not what tools are for. These tools are for students who are mostly focused on ecology or mostly focused on culture-based microbiology. They have other interests besides bioinformatics. And they just need to get a quick community profile or get a quick analysis done that's reasonably good. If you really want to optimize, then don't use the gateway. Use command line interface. Or you get so fluent in the gateway that you're comfortable making those tweaks. Because it is like I use it all the time. I can do a lot of command line stuff, but I still use the gateway because it's really easy for me to run things and I kind of know what the back end is. And generally speaking, like for the 16S, the back end is really, really well refined. But yeah, if you're doing something different than sort of the standard EMP library, Nextera library, and 16S, then everything else is kind of the Wild West.
How do you want us to cite? Pipeline?
So the pipe we're building, I don't know if Andy's finished it yet, but there is a pretty clear web page that explains the citations for the pipeline. The basic idea is if you use Ampliseq, you cite Ampliseq. They have their own paper. If you use our old pipeline, we have a manuscript that I think Sean Cleveland is the lead author on that explains the gateway. So, okay, let me back up. If you use the gateway, we have a manuscript for the gateway. We have a new manuscript that Andy's leading that is for the new gateway. So you have to cite the gateway. And you have to cite, the old one is Cleveland et al. The new one will be you et al. That'll be like, I use the gateway, meaning I use the C-MΑIKI gateway. Then you have to cite the pipeline that you use, which will either be Ampliseq, or if you use the older, that's Cedric Aristokezian. And then you have to, the problem with Cedric's paper is that it doesn't specify the parameters that you used in the pipeline.
Yeah.
So there's no bioinformatics in it. It's just, I use this pipeline. And so for Cedric's pipeline for 16S, you have to cite Andrea Yanni's paper, which basically has all the default parameters. And then I think Leah Thompson's paper has some of the parameters for the ITS, the old Cedric's old ITS pipeline.
Those parameters from the help page and wrote like a monologue and someone's like.
You can just cite Andrea's paper. If you're using
Andrea's paper.
Yanni et al.
More accessible, because I look.
It is, we have been, is it done? We are working on a web page that basically you just click on the side of the gateway that says, how you cite it.
Like, I need to fix this,
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, so, but every time you use the gateway, there'll be three things you have to cite: the gateway itself, the pipeline you used, and the parameters you used. And for the parameters, you probably either want to specify them yourself, or if you're essentially using default parameters, we'll have a couple papers listed that are basically pretty similar to the default parameters. Do you know of any other paper that we have for the ITS? I don't think I think Leah Thompson's paper is the one for the ITS pipeline.
One way to do it, or you can just publish.
You can publish your code, but you still have to have like a methods section. And Ampliseq will generate a methods section for you so that you can basically say, here's what I did, but Cedric's pipeline won't. So that's why you got to either specify it all yourself, which means understanding it, or just cite a paper that has done something default. We're done, so you can leave. But if you have more questions, I'll stand here because I don't have to get my kids for another hour.